Executive of the Commonwealth of Learning, Mr. Prime Minister of Uganda, Mr. Secretary General of the Commonwealth, Mr. Assistant Director General for Education UNESCO, honorary guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Graham Davies, the Vice Chancellor of the University of London, and it is my great pleasure indeed to welcome you here this morning on behalf of the University of London to this 5th Pan-Commonwealth Forum. It is particularly pleasing to be able to do this in the year of the anniversary of the award to the University of London in 1858 of its Royal Charter for the provision of education at a distance. There are many who associate distance education with the internet and modern technology. I'm sure this is not the case for anybody in this room this morning, but here I should go back and remind you that 150 years ago, when the University of London created its external teaching system, it opened up in this country the potential for people to study for a degree without needing to come to London. So firstly, the beneficiaries were people from the United Kingdom, but then over the ensuing years, the system expanded its interests and provided education at a distance all around the world. This early beginning was in itself an exploitation of what was then the state-of-the-art technology of the very slowly developing postal service around the United Kingdom and latterly around the world, and of course building upon the important technology of the printing press. We began with a small institution called the London Correspondence College. This college was the forerunner of what became the National Extension College in the United Kingdom, which many of you would know of, and that in turn evolved into the UK's very distinguished academic institution, the Open University, which Sir John Daniel led for a considerable number of years. And through those various developments, the roots, the foundations of learning at a distance were very, very firmly established. In that sense, we tend to think of ourselves in the University of London as the world's first open access university. We also recognise that it was important that those people studying at the different locations around the world had support, and so we opened up systems whereby we worked closely with partner institutions in countries around the world who provided the education which was then in due course tested through the examination system here. This not only led to the establishment of very well recognised universities in the United Kingdom, Nottingham, Exeter, Hull, but also the establishment of very remarkable universities all over what is now the Commonwealth. And these universities began as, one might say, children holding hands with the University of London, but they matured, became very vigorous adolescents, and then grew into maturity as universities in their own right, establishing themselves very firmly in their own jurisdictions. But all of this process of broadening access to learning was of critical importance, and to me it is no accident that in the middle part of the 19th century, that very distinguished author and journalist Charles Dickens gave to the University of London external system the title, The People's University. From those small beginnings, we now have a very vigorous child of our own. We have more than 45,000 students studying in more than 180 countries, pursuing up to 100 different courses of study. We have over the years had 5 Nobel Prize winners amongst the graduates of the external system. Most notable, of course, amongst them is Nelson Mandela. We have many heads of states, and you will find in the history, copies of which will be provided to you at the reception this evening in UCL, you will see that the creativity and the imagination of those involved in distance education over the years has been astonishing. To choose just one simple example, One of the areas where we have been exceptionally active has been in dealing with people who are in positions of unchosen hardship. And it is not an accident that, again, we have provided education not only to many people who've been incarcerated, but also in both the First and Second World Wars, we educated many thousands of prisoners of war. After about 145 years, we decided that we perhaps should take another step, and we did this by creating our own Centre for Distance Education, with the very specific mission to nurture and support a community of practice within the university, the broad University of London, all 19 colleges, this community who had interest in further learning, in distance learning, and in taking their offerings out to the wider world. And to some extent it is the pursuit of that mission that led us to make an application to the Commonwealth of Learning to act as hosts for this 5th Pan-Commonwealth Forum. And we were quite delighted when, in due course, I received a letter from my old friend Sir John saying that they thought that the juxtaposition of 150 years of scholarly activity in the domain of open learning was a good reason for allowing London to hold this 5th Pan-Commonwealth Forum. It has been a very exciting venture, and we are delighted that so many of you have come along. It is perhaps surprising to know that there are due during the week more than 700 delegates, 70 countries are represented. There is a Prime Minister, there are a number of Ministers of Education, there are ambassadors, principals of all the major non-governmental organisations across the world, and of course, and most importantly, a considerable number of youth representatives. This morning we have 3 keynote speakers: the Prime Minister of Uganda, the Commonwealth Secretary-General, and the Assistant Director for Education of UNESCO. But first, it is my pleasure to invite Sir John Daniel, the Chief Executive of the Commonwealth Learning, to join me in sharing this welcome. Sir John.